Good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon. And here you are all here on a Saturday afternoon. How many of you have had an unexpected friendship? Are there any of those in the crowd? There's some, right? As you take in today's program, I'm going to ask you this. Ask yourself how far you've come in that friendship and how far you might go for that person. This is a person that's in your life in an unexpected way. My name is Dan Kirby. In my day job, I'm an architect and an urban planner. When I worked and lived here in Maitland, which wasn't seem like not so long ago, I worked out right here at the J, so I know this area. It's been my honor to have been invited back to serve as a member of the steering committee for the Holocaust Center's Uprooting Prejudice exhibit. If you haven't been through the exhibit, you have to go. Have you guys been through the exhibit? Show of hands on how many. Great. It's just a can't miss exhibit. Yeah, round of applause for that exhibit. So what you know if you've been through the exhibit is that we explore some truths that are as old as humankind. One, that evil and injustice thrive when otherwise good people choose to do nothing. That understanding always begins with a question. That isolation and ignorance are fertilizer for hatred. These are truths as old as humankind. They're things we must continue to confront and to struggle with and to deal with. So we're so glad you chose to join us here on a Saturday afternoon, and I'd like to turn to introducing our guest for the program today. First of all, Mr. Scott Shepard. Scott was born and raised in the Mississippi Delta, Indianola, Mississippi, to be exact. This is not only the birthplace of blues music and blues legend B.B. King, but it also happens to be the birthplace of the White Citizens Council. Now, what I'm told about the White Citizens Council is that it's the white-collar branch of the people that wear the white hoods. Scott joined the Klan, and he rose through the ranks to be Grand Dragon in one group and the Imperial Wizard, or a national leader, in another KKK group. His godfather was Byron Della Beckwith. Now, some of you may know that name from history. It was Della Beckwith who murdered civil rights leader Medgar Evers. His associates in the KKK were responsible for the murders of the three civil rights workers, Goodman, Cheney, and Schwerner, and Carol Bryant, the woman who sent Emmett Till to his death for accusing him of whistling at her. Our second guest this afternoon is Jeff Scoop. Jeff was a member of the National Socialist Movement. That's the largest Nazi organization in the United States. He was part of it for 27 years. For 25 of those 27 years in the movement, in the NSM, while he was spreading racism and anti-Semitism across this country, Jeff was the leader of that group, 25 years. Today, he travels the country on a mission to repair the damage he did as a leader of that group, and encouraging and helping others that he wants to recruit to get out of the white supremacist and anti-Semitic movements. What do these two men have in common? They have in common a friendship with somebody who's known as the rock and roll reconciliator, and I'm going to say I have that in common with them too. My friend Daryl Davis, he's a different kind of brother, if you will. He's a musician, but most of all, he was influential in the decisions of, I'm going to say not influential, I'm going to say he was instrumental, being a musician, in the decisions of both Jeff and Scott to renounce their ideology, but also in their decision to devote their lives to de-radicalizing those who are still part of racist and anti-Semitic movements, and also their work to prevent others from joining these extremist groups in the first place. So I'd ask that you please join me in welcoming Jeff Scoop, Scott Shepard, and Daryl Davis to share their stories and answer your questions.
Well, hello there. Thank you, Dan Kirby, for that wonderful introduction. I'll start. My name is Daryl Davis, and I'll give you a little bit of background on myself before I turn it over to my brothers here, Jeff Scoop and Scott Shepard. I just turned 64 years of age. I was raised as a child of parents in the U.S. Foreign Service, so I grew up as an American embassy brat, traveling all over the world, starting at the age of 3 in 1961. I was born in 1958. So my first exposure to school was overseas, and my classes were filled with children from all over the world. My classmates were from Nigeria, Japan, Russia, Czechoslovakia, France, Germany, Switzerland, Italy, you name it. Anybody who had an embassy wherever we were assigned, all of their kids went to the same school. So my first exposure to school was overseas, and that scenario, that multicultural scenario, became my baseline for school. To me, that was the norm. But whenever I would return home, back here to my own country, I would either be in all black schools or black and white schools, meaning the still segregated or the newly integrated. And there was not the amount of diversity in my classrooms here that I had overseas. So literally, when I was overseas, I was living about 10 years ahead of my time, because that multicultural environment had yet to come to this country. Today, you walk into a classroom in any city, say Orlando or wherever, you see that multicultural thing. But that did not exist in this country back in the 60s. And even though desegregation was passed by the Supreme Court in 1954, it didn't just change overnight and integrate. It took years and years. So how it works is, you go overseas, you're in a country for 2 years, and then you come back home here to the States, you're here for a few months, maybe a year if you request it, and then you get assigned to another country overseas, back and forth, back and forth. I did kindergarten, first grade, third grade, fifth grade, and seventh grade overseas, and in between, I was here. When you combine my childhood travels with my parents in the Foreign Service to now my adulthood travels as a musician, I went to Howard University and got my degree in music, and now I perform all over this country and all over the world. When you combine those two sets of travels, childhood and adulthood, I've now been in a total of 61 countries on 6 continents, and I've performed in all 50 states. And all that is to say that I have been exposed to a multitude of different skin colors, ethnicities, religions, cultures, ideologies, belief systems, etc. And all of that has helped shape who I've become. And I can tell you something. You know, all that travel does not make me a better human being than anybody else. But what it has done is it has given me a better perspective on humanity across the world, because I've been exposed to so much of it. And my favorite quote of all time is by Mark Twain, and it's called the Travel Quote. And Mark Twain said, "Travel is fatal to prejudice, bigotry, and narrow-mindedness, and many people need it sorely on these accounts. Broad, wholesome, charitable views of men and things cannot be acquired by vegetating in one little corner of the earth all one's lifetime." And that is so true. And what I have picked up from my travels is this: no matter how far I go from my own country, the US, whether it's right next door to Canada or right next door to Mexico or halfway around the globe, no matter how different the people may be who I encounter, they may not look like me, they may not speak my language, perhaps they don't worship as I do, I always conclude that we all are human beings. And as such, we all want these same 5 core values in our lives. Everyone wants to be loved. We all want to be respected. We all want to be heard. We all want to be treated fairly. And we all basically want the same things for our family as anybody else wants for their family. And if we can learn to apply those 5 core values, or any of those 5 values, when we find ourselves in an adversarial situation, or in a culture or society in which we are unfamiliar, I can guarantee you that your navigation much more smooth. So my first encounter with racism was, I was age 10. We'd just come back from overseas. I was in the 4th grade, and I was one of 2 black children in the entire school. Myself in 4th grade and a little black girl in the 2nd grade. So consequently, all of my friends were white. And many of my guy friends were members of the Cub Scouts. And they invited me to join. This is 1968. Okay. Sure. In 1968. So I joined the Cub Scouts. And we had a parade along with the Girl Scouts, the Brownies, the Boy Scouts, the 4-H Club, and some other organizations. The streets were blocked off, the sidewalks were lined with nothing but white people, waving and cheering and smiling, having a good old time, and I got to carry the American flag. And everything was going along fine until we got to a certain point in this parade route when suddenly I'm getting hit by bottles, rocks, and soda pop cans by just a small group of white spectators off to my right on the sidewalk. I can see it today, it's still in my mind, and I remember it being a couple kids a year or 2 older than me and a couple of adults, who I assume were their parents, who were throwing things. And because I had no precedent for this behavior, my first thought was, oh, you know, these people over here, they don't like the Scouts. That's how naive I was. You know, it wasn't until my den mother, my cub master, my troop leader, all came running over and huddled over me with their bodies and escorted me out of the danger, you know, that I realized I was the only Scout getting this special protection. Nobody else was. So now I'm wondering, well, what did I do to upset these people? I didn't do anything. Why are they doing this? And I kept questioning, you know, my leaders, and all they would do was kind of shush me and rush me along, telling me to keep moving, everything will be fine, just keep moving. So they never answered my question. So when I got home that day at the end of the parade, my mom and dad, who were not attending the parade, were putting mercurochrome and Band-Aids on me and asking me how did I trip and fall down and get all scraped up. And I told them I did not fall down. I told them exactly what had happened. And for the first time in my life, my mother and father sat me down and explained to me what racism was. Now, you might find this kind of odd, but understand that's why I gave you my background of how I grew up and my classes overseas. When my parents told me this, I had never heard the word racism at the age of 10. I had no clue what they were talking about because that term and that behavior had not been in my sphere, in my little world. You know, I've been around people from all over the world. You know, we didn't look alike, we didn't talk alike, we didn't worship alike perhaps, but we all got along. We all worked together, went to school together, had slumber parties, played together. You know, so what my parents were telling me, my 10-year-old brain could not process. So I didn't believe my parents. You know, they had to be making this up. Nobody is going to want to hurt me for no other reason than the color of my skin when they had never spoken to me, they'd never even seen me before, they knew nothing about me. All they see is this, and you're telling me they're going to throw things at me because of the color of my skin. It doesn't make sense. And furthermore, to reinforce my thinking, the people over here on the sidewalk who were doing this to me did not look any different than my little friends in my school right here in the States or my friends overseas, whether they were my fellow Americans from the embassy or my little French friends or my Swedish or Norwegian or Australian friends who looked like those people. They didn't do that. So my parents had to be wrong. You know, something else is going on. And I didn't believe my parents. Well, a month, 2 months later after this incident, that same year, 1968, on April the 4th, which comes up in 2 days from now, Martin Luther King was assassinated. And I remember it very well. Every major city in this country, including my hometown, Chicago, and where I live right now, Washington, D.C., every major city in this country, Baltimore, Philadelphia, Detroit, Los Angeles, New York, all burned to the ground with violence and destruction in the name of this new word that I just learned a couple months back called racism. So now I saw it every night on the TV. And I then understood my parents had not lied to me. This phenomenon called racism does exist. But what I did not understand was why. Why does it exist? And so at that age, I formed a question in my own mind as a child, which was, how can you hate me when you don't even know me? And for the next 54 years, because I was 10 then, I've been looking for the answer to that question. Well, lo and behold, it fell into my lap one day. I didn't realize it till years later. I graduated with my degree in music, and I began playing, full time. There came a point where country music had made a resurgence in this country. It had gone dormant, for a while, and then it came back because there was a movie called Urban Cowboy. You remember that one, huh? With John Travolta and that mechanical bull and all those line dances, the Cotton Eye Joe and all that, right? So all the bars that were playing disco and top 40 and whatever else, they switched their format to country. And, I like country music. It's very easy to play. There is no difference between country music and the blues. Same 3 chords. Hank Williams Sr., the father of country music, learned to play the guitar from a black street blues guitar player named Rufus T-Tot Payne. Look it up. And anyway, so, to me, Hank Williams, Patsy Cline, these people are blues singers. They sing from the gut, from the heart, from the soul, and that's the blues. It's society that divides us. All right, so anyway, I joined this country band. I was the only black guy in the band, and consequently, usually the only black guy wherever we played. Well, we played a place in a town called Frederick, Maryland, which is about an hour and 20 minutes outside of Washington, D.C. And there was a lounge there called the Silver Dollar Lounge. The Silver Dollar Lounge had a reputation as being an all-white lounge. Now, there were no signs that said whites only, no blacks allowed, nothing like that. Like you've seen in the history books and things about the water fountain, the restrooms, and the restaurants. But it had that reputation. So blacks did not go there. And when you go somewhere where you're not welcome and alcohol is being served, it's not always a good combination. So here I was in the Silver Dollar Lounge. Now, the band had played there before many times. They were very well established in Maryland. I was new to the band, so my first time in there. We just finished playing the first set. We're taking a break. I'm following the entire band to go sit down at a table, and I'm walking behind them, and I felt somebody come from behind and put their arm across my shoulder. Now, I don't know anybody in this joint, right? So, the whole band's right there, so, I'm looking around to see who's touching me. And it was just a white gentleman, maybe 15, 18 years older than me, and big smile on his face. And he says, "Man, I sure like your all's music." I said, "Thank you." And I shook his hand. And he pointed at the stage and said, "I've seen this here band before, but I ain't never seen you before. Where'd you come from?" And I explained, "Well, yes, you probably have seen them because they told me they played here before. But I just joined them a couple months ago. This is my first time here." He goes, "Man, I sure like your piano playing. This is the first time I ever heard a black man play piano like Jerry Lee Lewis." Now, I was not offended, but I was rather surprised that given this guy's age, he's at least a decade and a half older than me, he should know the black origin of Jerry Lee Lewis's piano style. And I proceeded to explain to him that Jerry Lee and I got it from the same place, from black, blues, and boogie-woogie piano players. That's where rock and roll and rockabilly evolved. "Oh, no. Jerry Lee invented that. I ain't never heard no black man play piano like that, except for you." So I'm thinking, okay, well, this dude never heard Little Richard or Fats Domino. It's the same style, right? And I said, "Look, man, I know Jerry Lee Lewis. Jerry Lee Lewis is a very good friend of mine. He's told me himself where he learned how to play." He didn't buy that I knew Jerry Lee either. But he was fascinated with me. I was a novelty to him, I guess. So he invited me back to his table, wanted to buy me a drink. I don't drink, but I went back to his table, let him buy me a cranberry juice. He paid the waitress and took his glass, and he clinks my glass and cheers me. And he says, "This is the first time I ever sat down and had a drink with a black man." And now I'm totally mystified, how can this be? Because at that point in my life, I had sat down literally with thousands of white people and had a meal, a beverage, a conversation. This guy who's older than me had never sat down with a black guy before? How can this be? And I know for a fact that there are black people in Frederick, Maryland. I've seen them. So how is it that he seemed to have missed them all, right? So innocently, I asked him, I said, why? And he looked at me, he looked down at the table, and he didn't say a word. And I asked him again. And his buddy sitting next to him elbowed him and said, tell him, tell him, tell him. I said, tell me. He looked back at me just as plain as day, and he said, I'm a member of the Ku Klux Klan. Well, I burst out laughing at him, because now I didn't believe him, right? I know a lot about the Klan. After that incident in the Cub Scouts, I began, and still do, I have bought every book I could find. I have a vast library at home on black supremacy, white supremacy, the Ku Klux Klan, the Nazis in Germany, the neo-Nazis over here. I have a vast library. I've read it all. I know a lot about the Klan. And I know they don't just come up and embrace a black guy and want to praise his talent and buy him a drink and hang out. It doesn't work that way. So I figured, this guy is jerking me around, pulling my leg. And so I'm laughing with this joke. He goes inside his pocket, pulls out his wallet, flips through it, and handed me his Klan membership card. I recognized the Ku Klux Klan insignia, which is a red circle with a white cross and a red blood drop in the center of the cross. And whoa, this thing is for real. So it wasn't funny anymore, right? I gave it back to him and stopped laughing. But we talked about the Klan and some other things. And he was very friendly. And he gave me his phone number and wanted me to call him whenever I was to return to this bar, because he wanted to bring his friends, right? His friends to see this black guy who plays piano like Jerry Lee. Now, I'm not so sure he called me the black guy to his friends, but whatever he called me, he wanted to bring them to see me play. And so I call him every 6 weeks whenever we were on a rotation to come back that weekend and play. And I call him on a Wednesday or a Thursday and say, hey man, we're going to be down at the Silver Dollar, come on out. He'd come Friday and Saturday. He'd bring Klansmen and Klanswomen. Now, they didn't come in robes and hoods. They came in, regular clothes. And they'd gather near the stage and watch me play with the band. And then they'd get out on the dance floor and dance to our music. And on the breaks, I'd mingle with the audience and make my way over to his table, say hello, thank him for coming. Some of the Klansmen and Klanswomen were very curious about me, and they would hang at the table and want to meet me and talk to me. A couple of them, though, wanted nothing to do with me. All they wanted to do was look at me. So they see me coming, they get up and move across the room. So the implied message was, we don't want to touch you, we don't want to shake hands, we don't want to, talk to you, we just want to observe you, which was fine by me. So anyway, that was that. So this went on until the end of that year, at which time I quit that band and I went back to playing rock and roll and R&B and whatever else was going on. And, I lost track of the guy. I really had no reason to stay in touch with the Klan, right? And it wasn't like I had a day off, so I'd go to Frederick and hang out with the Klan, So I do that now, but not then. And so anyway, I lost track of him. And years later, it occurred to me, Daryl, the answer to your question that's been plaguing you since the age of 10, how can you hate me when you don't even know me? It fell right into your lap. Because I've been reading these books, and the books all talked about it, but they didn't tell me how somebody could hate me when they didn't even know me. And when I would ask people would say, oh, well, Daryl, that's just the way it is. There's some people who are just like that. Well, that's not an answer. That didn't give me any information. So now I'm realizing the answer fell into my lap. And the answer was, who better to ask that question of than someone who would go so far as to join an organization that has over 100-year history of practicing hating people who don't look like them, who don't believe as they believe. Daryl, get back in contact with that guy from the Silver Dollar and get him to hook you up with the Grand Dragon for Maryland. I live in Maryland, right across the DC line. Grand Dragon means state leader. Imperial Wizard means national leader. So get him to hook you up with the Grand Dragon from Maryland, interview that guy, and go around the country, interview other Imperial Wizards and Grand Dragons and members, and write a book about it, because no book had been written on the Ku Klux Klan by a black author. Mine would become the first. And so long story short, I reconnected with that guy, and I asked him to hook me up with the Klan leader. He was terrified. He didn't want to do that. He was afraid for his safety and for mine. And I begged and pleaded with him to give me the guy's, I knew his name. His name was Roger Kelly. I said, please give me Mr. Kelly's phone number and address, and I will take care of it. And he didn't even want to do that. But after twisting his arm, not literally, but figuratively, begging and pleading. He finally gave it to me on the condition that I not tell Mr. Kelly where I got his personal information. So I said, okay, fine. So I had my secretary give Mr. Kelly a call. And this is what you're going to find very interesting. I told her, now my secretary is white. The only reason I mentioned that, not because I could care less what color somebody is, but it's important to the story. I'm the one who had Roger Kelly's phone number. I could have called him myself, but I did not want him to pick up in my voice that I was black, because this Klansman had told me, Daryl, do not fool with Roger Kelly. Roger Kelly will kill you. And I was like, well, that's the whole reason I need to see him. Why would he kill me just because I'm black? I don't get this. You know, he's a dangerous guy. Don't fool with him. I said, well, I need to talk to him. So he warned me again. So I had Mary, my secretary, give him a call. And because I knew that if Mary called him, he would know by her voice that she's white. I figured if he picked up on my voice and I'm black, he'd be like, I'm not talking to you, click. And my whole project would have ended before it ever got started. But he would know the voice on the other end of the phone was white. And he would not automatically assume that this white woman was working for a black man. So that might up the odds that he would meet with me if she didn't tell him that I was black. And then once he appears to the interview, obviously he can figure out that I'm black, right? And he can decide for himself if he wants to talk to me, if he wants to attack me, if he wants to walk away. So she understood. She called him. He didn't ask what color I was. And he said yes, he would talk to me. And so we set it up for a motel room. In fact, the hotel above the Silver Dollar Lounge. And Mary and I got the room early, several hours early. I gave her some money, sent her to the soda machine down the hall, the vending machine, got her to get some soda pop out of the machine, fill the ice bucket, put it in there, get it all cold. I had no idea what Mr. Kelly was going to do when he arrived. You know, would he come in the room after seeing me? Would he, you know, go away or what? But I knew what I was going to do. I was going to be hospitable and offer him a cold beverage. So that's why we had all that set up. Now, the room just happened to be, if you folks are standing in the hallway and the door is here, you're standing looking in the door, you cannot see who's in the room. You have to walk into the room, turn to your right, and the room is like laid out back there. So until you're halfway in the room, you have no idea who's in there. I took the lamp table, took the lamp off, put it in the most obscure corner of the room, and put a chair on one side for Mr. Kelly, a chair on this side for me. And I had a little black bag, canvas bag, sitting beside my chair leg, in which I had a cassette recorder and some blank cassettes. I set the cassette recorder on the table, hoping that A, Mr. Kelly would come in, and two, that if he did stay, he'd let me record. And I had my blank cassettes. I had a copy of the Bible in this bag, because the Ku Klux Klan claims to be a Christian organization, and they claim that the Bible preaches racial separation. Now, I've read the Bible, and I'm trying to figure out, well, where does it say that blacks and whites must be separate? So I wanted to be able to pull out my Bible and say, here, Mr. Kelly, please, show me chapter and verse where it says blacks and whites must be separate. So I'm all prepared. Right on time, knock, knock, knock on the door. Mary hops up, runs around the corner, opens the door. In walks what is known as the Grand Nighthawk. A Nighthawk means bodyguard in our Klan terminology, security. So a Grand Nighthawk would be the bodyguard for the Grand Dragon. An Imperial Nighthawk would be the bodyguard for the Imperial Wizard. In walks this Nighthawk wearing military camouflage, that red circle, white cross patch, blood drop on his chest. Over here were the letters KKK. Embroidered on his cap, it said Knights of the Ku Klux Klan. And right here he had a semi-automatic handgun. He comes in, turns the corner, and sees me and just freezes. Well, Mr. Kelly is still around the corner and doesn't realize that his Nighthawk had stopped short. So here comes Mr. Kelly in a dark blue suit and tie, comes around the corner and slams right into the back of his Nighthawk, knocks this guy forward, and now they both are stumbling around trying to regain their balance. And I'm just sitting at the table like, you know, looking at them. And they're like looking all around the room. And, you know, I knew what they were thinking. I could read their faces like a highway billboard sign. They were thinking, did the desk clerk give us the wrong room number? Or is this an ambush? So I realized the apprehension. So I stood up and I went like this to show I had nothing in my hands. And I walked forward. I put my right hand out. I said, hi, Mr. Kelly. I'm Daryl Davis. And he shook my hand, and the Nighthawk shook my hand. So far, so good. I said, please, please, come on in. Have a seat. Mr. Kelly sat down, and the Nighthawk sat just opposite him. I sat just opposite him. The Nighthawk stood to his right at attention. And Mr. Kelly asked me for some ID. I gave him some ID. We exchanged a few words about that. And then we proceeded with this interview. And every time he would say, "Mr. Davis, the Bible says," I'd reach down and pull my Bible out and hand it to him and say, "Show me where." Or if my cassette ran out of tape, I'd reach down, pull out a fresh cassette. Every time I reached down like this into the bag, the Nighthawk would reach up like this. You know, he never pulled his gun, but he would rest his hand on the butt of the gun. And after about 45 minutes of this or so, the Nighthawk relaxed. He realized there was no threat in the bag, and I went in and out of the bag. He didn't move. About an hour, maybe a little more than an hour into this interview, Mr. Kelly and I just talking, and out of nowhere, this very fast, short noise occurred for no reason. It was like a that was it. And we all jumped because it was so out of context with what was going on here. I flew out of my chair and hit the table. And I knew that Mr. Kelly had made this noise. I didn't know what the noise was. The noise was too short and too fast for my ear to discern what it was. But I perceived it to be an ominous, threatening noise. After all, I'm a black guy. This is the head of the Klan. And I've already been told by one of his members, you know, don't fool with him, he'll kill you. So I got all that going on in my head. And I'm thinking, you know, what did I just do to cause Mr. Kelly to make some weird, threatening noise? And, you know, we all jumped. But I'm the only one who came out of my chair. Well, when you fear, because I feared for my life at that point. And when you fear for your life, you go into what's called survival mode. And there are only about 4 things you can do when you're in survival mode. Some people, they faint, they pass out, because the fear is so great, the brain cannot process it, and the brain shuts down, and you fall out and pass out, faint. I don't do that. Another thing people will do, their muscles will constrict, and they'll tighten up and just ball up and start shaking, and they can't let go. You can be punching them, kicking them. They won't even be trying to deflect the blows. You've seen people get into a fight, and they ball up into a fetal position. That's called paralysis by fear. They can't move. I don't do that either. Another thing people will do is to run away. That is your best option. As quickly as you can, separate yourself from the fear. Get away from it. And that is the option that I would have chosen had it been available to me. However, it wasn't available, because you cannot outrun a bullet in a motel room. You know, I was not armed. My secretary was not armed. The only person who I knew for sure who was armed was the Nighthawk. You see his gun right here. I did not know if Mr. Kelly had a weapon up under his suit and tie. All I knew was, you know, I cannot outrun a bullet. So the last option you have is to do what's called a preemptive strike. Get them before they get you. And when I flew out of my chair, I was on my way to dive across that table, grab the Nighthawk, and grab Mr. Kelly and slam them both down to the ground and take away the Nighthawk's gun and immobilize the situation. That's how quickly I think, and that's how quickly I act, because I've been in situations like that before. So that's where I was going. And when I hit the table, I'm less than 2 feet away from Mr. Kelly. I'm looking right into his eyes. I didn't say a word. My eyes were speaking loud and clear. In fact, my eyes were shouting so loud he could hear my eyes. And my eyes were saying to him, "What did you just do?" Well, his eyes had fixated on my eyes. He didn't say a word either, but I could read his eyes. His eyes were saying to me, "What did you just do?" And the Nighthawk had his hand on his gun looking at both of us like, "What did either one of y'all just do?" Right? Well, Mary was sitting on top of the dresser to my left because there were no more chairs. And she realized what had happened and began explaining it. What had happened, and then it happened again, and we all began laughing. What had happened was the ice in the ice bucket next to her on the dresser had begun melting, and the cans of soda were falling down the ice. That was it, you know? Somebody almost got shot over an ice cube. It's not funny, but it's ironic, you know? But this was a teaching moment. I won't say it was a learning moment. The learning would come later. But this was a teaching moment. And two examples of that are this. One, because this noise happened that neither of us could explain, he thought I did it, I thought he did it, and we both felt fear. And we both felt accusatory of one another. That's a human emotion, fear, right? So we both felt that. But when the fear was addressed, as Mary explained it, we felt relief, and we both began laughing. A Klansman and a black man laughing in a room together? You know, that's human, right? That's another human emotion, relief. So the lesson taught is this: all because some foreign entity, underscore, circle, highlight the word foreign, that being the bucket of ice cans of soda, had entered into our little comfort zone via the noise that it made, we became fearful of one another. The lesson taught is this: ignorance breeds fear. We fear those things of which we are ignorant. If you don't address that fear and quell it, that fear will escalate into hatred, because we hate the things that frighten us. If you don't address the hatred will escalate into destruction. We want to destroy the things that we hate. Why? Because they frighten us. But guess what? At the end of the day, they may have been harmless and we were simply ignorant. So we saw that whole chain almost unfold to completion. Had the Nighthawk drawn his gun and shot somebody, or had I pounced across the table and hurt one of them. Fortunately, it stopped short of that. But everybody here saw exactly what I'm talking about unfold to completion. Almost 5 years ago, in August 12th, 2017, in Charlottesville, Virginia, at that white supremacist rally, when a white supremacist, on that day, there was a lot of ignorance in Charlottesville. There was a lot of fear in Charlottesville. There was a lot of hatred in Charlottesville. And what did it culminate in? It culminated in destruction. When that white supremacist got inside his vehicle and tried to murder as many counter-protesters as he could by driving his car full force into the crowd. He succeeded in injuring over 24 people and murdering one young lady named Heather Heyer. Ignorance breeds fear, fear breeds hatred, hatred breeds destruction. So this is what I've learned, and I'll tell you a little bit later how to address it. But through all this, Roger Kelly and I became friends over time. Today I own his robe and hood. Today I own lots of robes and hoods and swastika flags and things like that. Some of it thanks to my good brother here, Jeff Scoop, and my brother over there, Scott Shepard. And I'm going to let them tell you how that morphed into that relationship. I'm going to turn it over here to Jeff.